In 2015, reports say Cambridge Analytica played a controversial role in Nigeria's presidential election. Fast forward to spring of 2018, Facebook was called to testify before the US Congress. This was in response to news that Cambridge Analytica used data of over 87 million Facebook users to influence the US elections. These events unveiled a lack of consistent and widespread regulation of internet and computer technology, especially around data privacy and security. In Nigeria, NITDA, the National Information Technology Development Agency, is charged with regulating data protection practices at all levels, federal, states, and local government. According to the guidelines, public institutions must consciously protect the personal information of data subjects. Urenna Okone of Tax Tech has more.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Privacy Notes, the podcast. I am Urina and this is the Privacy Notes brought to you by TaxAid Technologies Limited in collaboration with the NDPR Academy. Today we'll be discussing about an interesting topic, which is the NITDA's guidelines. NITDA being the National Information Technology Development Agency, the guidelines for the management of personal data by public institutions in Nigeria, which was released on the 18th of May 2020. Now, this is still a really great area for public institutions and offices in Nigeria. So what we're doing today is to bring you the relevant information that you need to know. And with us today is a special guest who doubles as a partner, Data Protection Compliance Services at TaxAid Technologies Limited, TaxTech, and as the Sub-Dean of the NDPR Academy. Okay, we're going to go on a short break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking with Mr. Oyemi Oke, and he'll be enlightening us on this topic. Hello everyone, we are back. This is still Privacy Notes, the podcast, brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy. So we have with us Mr. Oyemi Oke, as I earlier said. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well, Urena. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for coming and speaking on this podcast. This is going to be an interesting one.
Yes,
okay,
I hope so.
Let's dive right into today's topic. So for starters, what institutions can be regarded as a public institution in Nigeria?
Well, with regards to public institutions, essentially, I would give a very, very wide definition of what a public institution is. It is any agency or any government department that is funded by government funds. So this means that ministries, departments, agencies, even companies where government has some kind of shareholding would qualify as a public institution. And the interesting thing about public institutions is that because of the way the Nigerian system is, we think that public institutions are really literally above the law. But one thing you must note is that with regards to data protection and perhaps most likely any other law in Nigeria that affects a public institution, that public institution is supposed and expected to comply with relevant rules as laid down in the relevant law or regulation. And one of such is NITDA, or NITDA's NDPR, which is actually the base regulation as it relates to data protection. This is a fulcrum of data protection in Nigeria, perhaps apart from the Nigerian constitution. And it serves as the basis for which any organization, so which we call data controllers that handle personal data, the basis for which they're supposed to treat personal data of data subjects or who are individuals under this instance. Now, apart from the NDPR, what we're discussing today, as you have said, is the NITDA guidelines for public institutions as it relates to personal data protection. Now, the guideline, apart from the general obligations on data protection, the guideline provides for specific obligations on the public institutions. And one of the things we find out, and I'm sure you would agree with me, that when you go to any public institution, they collect different kind of personal data from you.
Yes.
Your name, sex, religious belief, and all that. And you will find out that most of those categories of personal data actually fall within the realm of what we call sensitive personal data. And before you can do that, you need to get the consent of the relevant data subject. So it's not just a question of, how public institutions can be, whereby they give you forms to fill and you ask them, so why am I filling this? Or what's the basis? Sometimes that's how we met it here, or that's our procedure here. They must explain to you the basis for the collection of the data, and you as a data subject should give consent, especially when the personal data is sensitive personal data. So a public institution cannot just collect personal data and say that that's how we collect it. You must be able to explain the rights to the data subject and also get the consent for the release of that personal data. And one thing you must note is that even if, let's assume that you find a very, very stubborn or recalcitrant data subject that says, I am not going to give you this data for one reason or the other, or for any reason best known to that data subject, it still does not mean that the data subject should be denied access to the service by that public institution. So those are some of the things we should note under the public institutions guideline with regards to obligations of public institutions. Apart from that, the other thing we should bear in mind is that public institutions have an obligation to appoint a data protection officer within 90 days of the regulation, of the guidelines rather. And the guidelines were released on the 18th day of May 2020. That means that by August 17th, all public institutions, ideally, under the guidelines, should have appointed data protection officers. So if you have not appointed a data protection officer as a public institution, by 17th of August, then you are flouting the provisions of the guidelines published by NITDA. So who should be a DPO or a data protection officer under the public institution guideline? It is supposed to be a senior member of staff, and that person should report directly to either the chief executive or the board or the council of the relevant public institution. So it is not supposed to be just anybody, but somebody who is at the senior level. And the reason for this is obvious. Data protection is a big issue which should not be taken lightly, and the leadership of the organization or a public institution must be very aware. So that's why NITDA has included that a DPO must be a senior member of staff. Another compliance obligation is that a DPO must be trained. So it's not just that you should appoint somebody, you must train that person. And the guideline goes as far to say that that training must be done within 90 days of appointment. So if you appoint someone as a data protection officer, you must train that person. And that is where an organization such as TaxTech and NDPR Academy are very relevant, because these are the things that we do on a daily basis in terms of training. By default, any data protection compliance organization has a mandate under the NDPR to train people. So a public institution can reach out to any DPCO for training.
Okay, that's been an enlightening one. I've learned a lot. I hope you were listening, and I hope you learned a lot as well. You can play back this if you want to listen again. I will take a short break and we'll be back. Okay, we are back. This is still Privacy Notes, the podcast brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy. That was a lovely session that we just had with Usmayo Yemike. He's still here with us. I'll just be stating out some key points that he said. He said 90 days from when the guideline was released, you have to, as a public institution, you have to appoint a senior level officer who would act as the DPO, which is the data protection officer for that institution. And, the deadline falls on Sunday, August 16, 2020, right? And that data protection officer just don't appoint someone. You have to train the person adequately how to go about data protection in Nigeria. And to do that, the training can be done at the NDPR Academy. You just reach out to us at info@ndpracademy.ng. And, we'll guide you through what you need to do. And we have trainings such as the physical, there's COVID-19 right now, so we're doing fully virtual, and it will be an interesting one, I promise you. And we also have bespoke training. Just reach out to us and we'll guide you through that. Also, he also mentioned that, as a public institution, you have to appoint a data protection compliance organization. That's a DPCO. And remember that TaxSec is a licensed DPCO by NITDA. So, this has been an interesting one. Do you have any final words for us, Mr. Oyemeke?
Well, thank you again, Irina. I think I just want to stress some other compliance obligations or some of the things public institutions must be aware of under the guidelines. One of such is that there is a requirement to conduct a data protection impact assessment, especially when you want to get information from members of the public. And when you do that, you must also inform members of the public the purpose for which you want to collect the personal data, what it will be used for, and the likes. Also, all public institutions must have a privacy policy. Under the NDPR, a privacy policy essentially it's a notice to members of the public with regards to how personal data of data subjects will be handled. If you have any complaint, there should be an email for which a data subject can make complaint, and you should also spell out the rights under the privacy policy, spell out the rights of the data subject. So the privacy policy can either be on the website of the public institution, and let's assume maybe for the peculiarity of the Nigerian system, a public institution does not have a website, then it should be conspicuously displayed within the premises of the public institution. I think the last point before we go is that the guideline harps a lot on data security. So it's expected also that public institutions should put in place data security protocols and standards like the ISO 27001 2013, which we can also assist with in putting together. You must, as a public institution, ensure that you have adequate security apparatus to prevent a breach in privacy of personal data of data subjects. So I think those are some of the things I just said I should reiterate before we go. And also there are certain compliance requirements that if you want to process data, there's this concept of public interest. If you want to process data on the basis of public interest, then you need approval of either the president or the chief executive of the public institution, depending on the circumstance. So with regards to what a public institution needs to do under the public institutions guidelines as published by NITDA.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Okay, so if you want to know more about these guidelines, we've done like a summary for you, which is called 20 Guidelines for the Management of Personal Data by Public Institutions. You can find that at www.taxsec.com.ng or www.thenDPRacademy.ng, and you can read more about this. This has been an interesting session. You need to go back and listen to everything. It's been a great one. This is an NDPR professional who's been in this field for a while right now. So till next week, this is Privacy Notes, the podcast, brought to you by TaxTech and the NDPR Academy.
You've been listening to Privacy Notes. On the next episode, we'll be talking about the top privacy mistakes to watch out for and how to avoid them.